Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear colleagues and participants, and welcome to the 9th webinar of the UN LEA Task Force Secretariat. It's my honor to welcome you to today's webinar to discuss the heart of inclusive development and human rights, ensuring legal identity for Indigenous peoples, aligning with the UN legal identity and the Sustainable Development Goal 16.9. I'm Predrag Savic. I'm part of the Demographic and Social Statistics branch in UNDESA, and we are one of the co-chairs of the UN Legal Identity Agenda Task Force, which is a holistic approach for civil registration, vital statistics, and identity management systems. Together with UNICEF and my colleagues in UNDP who are present here, we support coordinating the UN LEA task force, which is itself composed of 16 different UN entities who are active in the role of legal identity, civil registration, vital statistics, all working together on global, regional, but also country level. Task force members support member states in various ways. For example, as DESA especially, we contribute to the development of normative framework and guidance around legal identity. Members also provide technical financial support to NCTs and member states, something we're going to hear about today. We also coordinate activities of different UN agencies to ensure interagency collaboration and alignment. And we also engaged with communication and advocacy. And I think today's event is one example of that. As many of you know, since 2023, so since last year, we have been organizing these monthly webinars for UNCT staff members who work on legal identity issues to introduce policy guidance, but also to share country experiences between us. The ultimate goal, of course, is for member states to achieve the SDG target 16.9, which calls for legal identity for all. Legal identity itself, it's not only about SDG 16, it's also catalytic for achieving at least 10 other sustainable development goals, but I don't think I have to sort of preach to the converted. As of course you will know, those without legal identity, they face enormous challenges, which include lack of access to public services, think of lack of access to education or social protection, and so on. It also includes inability to exercise political rights, such as the right to vote, if you do not have a voter ID or an ID in general. But also on the other side, there are also higher risk of exploitation or from criminal enterprises. There are vulnerabilities and risk of becoming a refugee or a stateless, internally displaced person if you cannot prove who you really are. These vulnerabilities are especially exacerbated when it comes to the indigenous peoples and hard-to-reach groups in general, who face additional hurdles and intersecting inequalities. And we all know the pledge to leave no one behind and to reach those behind first, those furthest behind first. In that light, we have the objectives of this webinar, which is 9th, or the second at least for this year in 2024. And the objectives are, for one, to ensure that country teams have a comprehensive understanding of what challenges Indigenous peoples face, and we will hear from our speakers about that today, but also to emphasize opportunities to improve access to legal identity among Indigenous people and vulnerable local communities. And lastly, to introduce some good practices, to hear about some programmatic procedures and innovative solutions adopted from different countries. Today, it's my pleasure to have with me a couple of fantastic speakers and colleagues who come from UNDP's Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program. The Small Grants Program, as my colleagues will explain, has been around for more than 30 years, since 1992, and has made positive contributions in promoting LNOB partnerships with youth, with women, with Indigenous, with persons and disabilities, etc. Today, I'm joined by Terence AED, who is a program manager of the Global ICCA Support Initiative, which is delivered by the Small Grants Program in 50 countries in support of the Indigenous peoples and local communities at the grassroots level. I'm also joined by my dear colleague Risa Arai, who is a program specialist and working on legal identity within UNDP. And after the presentations of Risa and Terence, we will delve into some of the country case studies. Namely, we will hear presentations from Namibia, Panama, and Mongolia, three very different regions of the world. And we have Nikki Gasseb, Beatrice Schmidt, and Gambatar Bandi joining us today, who are respectively national coordinators for UNDP implemented small grants program in these countries. The small grant program in these countries has been operated in 2003 or 2007, and there are hundreds of small grants which have been financed up to date. It's my pleasure to give the floor now to my first speaker, who will be Risa Arai, as I mentioned, program specialist of working on legal identity within UNDP, and my close counterpart when it comes to legal identity agenda in general. Risa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Predrag, for the nice introduction, and I welcome everyone. As Predrag said, my name is Risa, and then I think most of the audience know who I am, but I am the global focal point of the legal identity from the UNDP side. And today I would like to give, because today's audience is a bit different from usual, I would like to give a brief overview on the legal identity and also how we came up with this idea of having a focused webinar on the legal ID around Indigenous peoples. So, as many of you know already, legal identity is one of the critical SDG indicator 16.9, legal identity for all, including birth registration by 2030. And then this particular indicator is extremely crucial because the data from civil registry and then those identity registry, it's essential to measure most of the indicators around SDGs. So in order to track the progress of the SDG, you need to have the robust civil registration system in place. And I'm sorry for the noise. My daughter is roaming around in my room because I'm working from home today, but I hope you can hear me well. So I just want to quickly introduce what it means by legal identity. So when SDG was set up, legal identity didn't have any any official definition. And in 2019, we have disagreed on this particular definition. The legal identity is the basic characteristic of an individual's identity conferred through registration by an authorized civil registration authority. So which means this is something that comes from the government. And when there's no birth registration from the beginning, when parents did not submit the birth registration for their children, for example, it may be conferred by a legally recognized identification authority, which can be, for example, National ID Authority, through court, or for the civil registration, or there are various ways. And the UNDESA has a bunch of guidelines how to do this. And this has to be linked to the civil registration system for holistic approach from birth to death, because civil registry needs to be recording the vital events of one person from birth to death in comprehensive manner. And then many indigenous community peoples, they have some challenges to access to the civil registry to register their vital events. So that is one of the kind of underlining problem why there are some people from the indigenous communities, they still suffer from the lack of legal identity. So as Predrag said in the beginning, there are 16 UN agencies working around legal identity issue. And we tried to coordinate our approach to the member states, not to give them contradictory advice, and then make sure that our approach is our support is like really seamless, covering from the birth registration to death registration, national ID management, and also census in order to identify where the people without legal identity are. So that's where like 16 agencies works together. And then we also work with the World Bank groups too, which is also like part of the UN agencies, and then somehow it's not looked that way in many cases. But yeah, and then we try to extract lessons learned from the various country cases, regional cases, and then through this kind of webinar, we share good cases with other country colleagues to learn from it. And our approach, just this is my last slide, is to make sure that this legal identity is covered in a holistic manner, and there is a full interoperability among the legal identity ecosystem. So when we say legal identity, of course, it starts from a civil registry, but we want to make sure that data and then the system is interoperable across functional registries, which is, for example, tax, elections, driver's license, passport. There are other functional registries, but we want to make sure that there's only one single source of the truth about one's identity. And the whole ecosystem is interoperable through various system and then technology. And then by doing so, the most important thing is that this is done in a manner to comply with international standards around the human rights, and especially for there are concerns around the indigenous peoples. So that's today's topic. And it's really interesting because when we discussed with Terence in the very beginning, like around 6 months ago, we just learned that there are so many examples that indigenous community issues were tackled through the SGP program, but it was never codified as a legal identity project. So we didn't really know that there were so much things to learn from their cases. And today I'm really excited to learn from different country cases, what kind of challenges they face on the ground, and then how the program resolved those legal identity challenges there. So that's the end of my part, and over to you, Terence.
Thank you so much, Risa. So as Predrag mentioned, I'll give a few words about the history of the Small Grants Program, which started back in 1992, and some of the evolution in terms of legal identity and what we understand as legal identity, which ranges both from individuals that don't even have IDs through to the formation of associations and opening bank accounts from very different parts of the world, and touch upon a few of the discussion points. So just briefly, the program itself is a mechanism of funding for civil society organizations, where the GF has been the main donor, so the Global Environment Facility, but UNDP also works with many other bilaterals and foundations as well. So the grant size has been typically up to 50,000 with an average of $30,000, with decision making that is, and we'll hear about it from the countries, decentralized very much to the national level. And so this is part of the governance work of UNDP to involve civil society actors as well in the review and approval of the projects, including indigenous peoples. So the program has worked in more than 130 countries. Some have closed due to EU accession. Currently, we have 127 and more than 28,000 grants. So next slide, please. So here you'll see on the map the spread of where the SGP has worked. Today we've selected 3 examples from Panama in Latin America, one from Africa and Namibia, and one from Mongolia in Central Asia. In order to reach those furthest left behind, to find more flexible formats and ways of working. So not to assume that indigenous communities in remote areas will be able to write proposals. So the simplification of formats, both in terms of use of local and other vernacular languages. We've tested out techniques such as participatory video, you see on the left there, with various handbooks, how to reach maybe transhuman or nomadic populations that move around, and how to assist them to, say, open bank accounts. I should just say, though, that
recording in progress.
One very particular case of indigenous peoples are those also in voluntary self-isolation. So we had invited Brazil to talk today, that there are indigenous groups who would prefer not to have contact with the outside world. And so how do you address those from a legal point of view? And there are various cases in the Amazon region. So just very briefly, in terms of there have been various evaluations of the program, which have looked at the range of different types of project interventions. You see some of them there, ranging from questions of land tenure to protection of traditional knowledge. So many different aspects of legal identity involved in all of that. Next slide, please. One of the challenges too that we've seen is that sometimes Indigenous peoples are represented by NGOs. So over time, over the last 30 years, there's been a progressive increase of what we would call direct access, so funding directly to Indigenous peoples, not through an NGO in the capital speaking on their behalf. And this is something which is becoming increasingly important in the international negotiations on climate and biodiversity, that Indigenous peoples are requesting a more direct access. And here you see some of the percentages around since the pilot phase. Next slide, please. And we have differences in across regions, but in essence, we've seen in many countries an increase in what we would refer to as direct access through some of these techniques of assisting in the creation of bank accounts and legal recognition. So I think I have one more slide, and then we'll hand over. So yeah, these are some of the publications we have which summarize the experiences on access. You can, well, we can share the link somehow in the recording around how to download these publications. So without further ado, I'd like to then now hand over to our colleague from Namibia. Oh, sorry. These are some of the key questions on challenges we've faced. So the three presentations will explore these topics in terms of access to services, poverty reduction, as well as the human rights based approach. Just to emphasize that in the small grants program, we have three pillars. One is environmental benefits, poverty reduction, and the third one being what we would call legal empowerment. And so this is how we've structured the three presentations. I think there might be one final slide, Risa, before we move to Namibia. Okay, so yeah, these are some of the examples of legal identity issues that the SGP has worked with. On the left, this question of just access to basic public services. We'll hear about opening of bank accounts, some of the difficulties there, simple documents that may not be obtainable, and then we'll hear a little bit more at the end from Mongolia about this question of collective identification through community associations. So let's go straight into the first presentation from Nikki. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Terence, for the opportunity. I have a bit of trouble with my PC, so I'm on my mobile now. Yes, we have through SGP and through ICCAGS, I basically support a number of Indigenous peoples, localities throughout the country, from north to the east, to the northwest, basically. And as you can see on the first slide, pictures of various Indigenous peoples, communities we have, basically about 13 main Indigenous peoples groups we have in the country, as you can see by those pictures. And almost all of them have been supported through SGP for one or another project. The latest support we have given is to the San people that basically frequents Namibian, Botswana, South Africa, and sometimes even Zambia and Angolan land space. And the ones that we are now supporting still with an active project is close to Botswanan border, and they basically are going across the borders without identification and coming back into Namibia. There's no strict rules there. They can go about 30 kilometers inside the Botswanan border or Angolan border without having the necessary identification documents. And then I already said that we basically supported most of the Indigenous peoples in the country. What we have challenges in terms of legal documentation. You are supposed to have a birth certificate. Then the next one would be your ID, and perhaps if you are traveling, your passport. But you know, these people are many times marginalized. They are at the farthest ends in the Namibian space, where services are very limited, and outreach to them through government and through civil society organizations are very, very, very minimal. And therefore, they many times struggle to have identity documents. Kids are being born, they live for up to into their 60s without having legal documentation, and that poses a problem many times because as an example, if you are considered for social grants by the government, like the old pension fund that you are supposed to receive from the age of 60, you must be able to have some kind of an identity to be able to have that a social grant. Also, when you receive support through different entities, different support donors, you are many times required to open a bank account, and you cannot open a bank account because you don't have a legal document. And many times these documents are bank accounts are being opened by the legal elites who have got means to vehicles and IDs, and many times the results are not so good, you know, in terms of the support that we would want to provide to the indigenous people, basically. And then recently, or you know, since independence, there has been aggressive campaigns from our government to have all Namibians, especially the marginalized, have their relevant documentation. But then it's a struggle, you know. You would still find pockets, and the next slide will basically show that there are a number of communities identified in given areas where they have got no legal documentation. What we do as SGP is, when we end up supporting these communities, we would then unofficially, of course, find out about the legal status in terms of their area, but also in terms of themselves as human beings. And then if there are problems with legal identity documents, we will then make the link between the community and the counselor, usually a political counselor or a CSO that is supporting within that specific area. And then we will follow up and keep that contact until something happens for these people to have some kind of a legal identity. And as I've said, it's usually the political councillors or the traditional authority councillors, or many times volunteers, or even some community members that can assist in negotiating or processing, or assisting people to have legal documentation. The next slide. Basically would want to, I found it difficult to upload the list. It's a list that was developed recently, 12th December last year, by a community that we are supporting, Indigenous people's community we are supporting, basically. And then it's about 59 people have been identified having one or another document lacking, either the birth certificate or the identification document. And then what we do is to provide such a list to the colleagues that I mentioned in terms of the councillors or civil society organizations, to have at least the names of these people and support them in attending this documentation. And as I've also said prior, there are a number of reasons why these people don't have this documentation. And in any case, sometimes it's their own doing, moving between the borders of the countries, and it's becoming, they are not stationary. And then mind you, most of our, about 60% of our indigenous peoples are nomadic people. They are not supported to stationary. I will leave it at there, Terence, for further questions.
Thank you so much, Nikki. So I think we'll just go straight into the next presentation from Beatriz in Panama. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon in other cases. So yes, I am Beatriz Schmidt, the National Coordinator in Panama. I try to put some pictures so you can see some of the indigenous peoples. We have 7 different indigenous peoples but divided in 13 territories. Okay, I wanted to explain that these 3 dots that show you where we work. We work like in the edges of the country, in the edge where you can see that, because this is the map that has also the forest covered. You can see that the forest that is in the areas where less cities and exactly where the indigenous communities lives. So we work in the Darien area. We work in also the other corner in the close to the border to Costa Rica, and in the south, in this little town where of the grid. Right now we have all these projects, 27 active projects, even though we have had almost 300 projects in the last 15 years. And then there's only one ICCA project that it hasn't finished. It's in North Territory. And we have 4 projects in networks that help to do community capacity development. Next slide, please. This slide, which is very, very, what means is that 16 of the 27 projects are actually active, are with NGOs. From them, half of those NGOs are working on behalf on indigenous peoples, but that haven't been able to have their legal identity as an organization yet. But we have 11 that is 40% directly to organizations that are community-based organizations of indigenous and rural communities. Half of those, you can also see, maybe you cannot see it, but the amount of, even though there is 40% to a community-based and 60% to, or a little more than to NGOs, the funds still are only 25% to community-based organizations, because they are not allowed to yet by the banks to receive biggest amounts of money, like strategic projects of more than $100,000. So I wanted to show that we are moving forward to have direct finance to communities, but some still have to work with NGOs. Here, we just wanted to tell you about all the challenges that you are trying to address, how in SGP Panama, we want to give examples of good practices. And then is the continuous support to the CBOs to achieve the legal status. But that continuous support starts with the support that we have to give to those persons to have their legal status. Panama has a very good rate or statistics about giving birth certificates to a lot of most of the population, but the problem is that those IDs are expired. So when we go to the moment to join the people into an organization, their identifications are expired. In order to renew the certification, or the ID, they have to go to visit the capital of the province or the capital of the country twice. The first to ask for the new ID, and then they have to go 2 weeks later to pick it up. And if you live, I don't know, days and very expensive out of the capital, that is very complicated, or it's expensive, so we have to support that. Then you need in order to open a bank account as an organization, you need that the members of the organization are persons with a bank ID, a banking personality, let's say, which means that they have to present their IDs into the bank, and all of them have to present a bill of the water, of the public services, in order to explain where they live. But of course, indigenous communities don't have like the electricity bill or the water bill, because they don't have electricity or water. So we have to come with a process to go to the police station to get a certificate that allows that explain that they live in the community, so the bank can fill the address with some kind of hard evidence, which is a certification from the police, because there's no public services bill. And the other barrier we find is that in order to access to public offices or to public banks in the country of Panama, you have to have your shoulders covered. I don't know why, and that is also a barrier, because most of the indigenous peoples, or especially women, they don't cover their shoulders, even though they have shirts. So we have to also talk to the bank about that. Once we formalize people in organizations, with the Ministry of Environment, we work a legal framework so they can form small community-based organizations, only 3 to 5 people, and they don't have to be literate. They can sign only. And then we have to do an agreement with the bank, with the National Bank of Panama, so they can facilitate the barriers that bureaucracy puts to indigenous people or to rural communities. So we had in 2023 this legal agreement with the bank, but in that legal agreement is SGP that back up the income of the organization, and we have to send letters to the bank every time we are going to send money to that bank account, and we have to report about the good use of the funds. So we are like the fiduciary, I don't know how to say that in English. So what it means is that it's not only about having the legal identity, it's also about use it in a way during your lifetime that you can have also a capacity to organize formally. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beatriz. Yes, Terence, go ahead.
Thanks, Beatrice. Just to maybe stress a couple of points you made there, which is the need as well for a physical address. And so this question of the water or electricity statements, how can groups who don't really have a street or a postal address, and so this is another thing in SGP we've been exploring in terms of different forms of providing an address. The second point is that historically in the SGP, and you just heard from 2 countries, that there is not a requirement for formal registration of a CSO or an NGO or indigenous people organizations to receive funding. It's often something that is an output or an outcome of the projects to build that capacity in terms of the rules and procedures and procurement and those kinds of things. Predrag, back to you.
Gambatar,
okay, thank you.
Yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello to everyone. So my presentation will be on collective identification, because in terms of personal legal identity, there is no question in Mongolia. Everybody is documented, and there is no talk about that. So SGP in Mongolia is working with legally identified community groups. We need to assist. The process is still going, but we need to assist and help communities not registered legally. So before that, before I'm going into my presentation, so I briefly introduce about Mongolia, because some people may be interested. SGP Mongolia, you can see on your screen SGP geographical focus area. So Mongolia is quite a big country. Then SGP is working in central part of Mongolia. So geographically, it is in central part, but we cover about half of the country's territory, because although it is big, but it is a very sparsely populated country. So please, next slide, please. So our population is 3.4 million. Territory is 1.6 million square kilometers. So it means we have 2 people per square kilometers. We have about 700 environmental NGOs. So before 1990, Mongolia was a socialist country, and we had no civil society groups except 2-3 semi-governmental NGOs. So now there is many NGOs. Only I hear talk about environmental NGOs. There are many other NGOs. So we have also registered community groups, which is called Friendship, that mostly deals with environment protection and natural resource management. So about 1,600 registered friendships. So there are also agricultural cooperatives. Some of them also apply for SGP grants. So we have potential applicants, identified applicants. So that these are national NGOs, provincial NGOs, friendships, and agricultural cooperatives. So these are potential applicants for SGP. Please, next slide. So this so SGP is operational in Mongolia since 2003, and over this time we have implemented 518 grants in Mongolia. So these grants have been implemented by 231 national and provincial NGOs and 287 CBOs, community-based organizations. So, of course, in the past, we have also implemented many community groups to get legal identity, because this is new process after 1990s. So many community groups were needed to get a legal identity. So that is, with the legally identified potential organizations that can apply for SGP. But we have many community groups still. They want to apply for SGP grants and involved in SGP activities. But there are groups, community groups, agricultural in rural areas, then they cannot apply. So those who face different kinds, the second group of community groups are those who face different kinds of difficulty. They want to create legally identified organization, but they face some difficulties. So then there are many herd groups. There are many herd groups, especially in the south and of SGP geographical area. They want to apply, but they need legal identity. Then small farmers who deals with vegetables especially in northern Siling area. Then what we did that we had a good opportunity to involve these groups because of two main factors. One is from 2015, SGP Mongolia has started slowly shifting to a landscape approach after successful implementation of Comdex grants, which had given us a lot of knowledge and experience in acting at landscape levels. So there is socio-ecological landscape, production landscape. We worked on these landscapes. So we had good experience because of Comdex. Then next factor is after a little more than a decade of SGP operation in Mongolia, there have been still appearing skilled and experienced NGOs and even CBOs, experienced CBOs that have started helping, assisting other groups in implementation of SGP grants. In 2014, there has been established partnership development, JEF SGP Mongolia Community Network, Then 2 years later, it became an umbrella NGO for all, not all, but for many community groups involved in SGP activities. So next, please. So this NGO is very helpful for SGP to work with unregistered or unregistered or community groups with no collective legal identity. So this this network, has this NGO has its own training camp. So you can see that the board is meeting here, and this is the logo of the first one is logo of this network. Then training camp, and also people come with the tents and stay here 1-2 days. Then they are trained. Then thereafter they will be able to apply if they are registered. So next please, next slide please. So it means that this combination of this landscape approach and skilled NGOs and CBOs can, has helped to include many of unregistered community groups at a particular landscape, because if one landscape is taken, then inside of this landscape, so everybody, including community members, women groups, and also youth, and also disabled people. So everybody inside this selected landscape can participate in 1 or 2 grants we implement inside one landscape selected. So this landscape approach application, excuse me, can you go? Yeah. This landscape approach application is still progressing, and it opens wider, action areas. For example, we work now in integrated small river watershed, but this is a big issue, but it is usually done by bigger projects. But we try to involve, all community people within one small river basin, and implement 1 or 2 grants, not many. Then we also work with working within ICCAs, including some sacred sites. Then inclusive pasture management, this becomes popular, and because Mongolia is mostly pasture area, then there are many herders. So this pasture management is very important. Then we use it as a pasture landscape. So the areas, topics in which SGP grantee, NGO, CBOs have expertise and experience have expanded and become applicable to a broader context. So please, next slide. So I have had here only few landscape pictures, because I wanted to know you that Mongolia is, has different landscapes, starting from high mountains, ending with steppe, gobi areas. The last picture is, sacred place, so sacred site. So we have many in Mongolia traditionally. So the above mentioned progress has made the inclusion of this interested SGP activity in SGP activities. Those interested in SGP activity, possible to be part of SGP grantees. Okay, this previously we selected one landscape area and we implemented some different small grants inside. But now we select one, for example, one landscape. Then within that landscape we implement, one or two grants, maximum 2 grants. Then that grants covers everybody inside. So legally identified or not. So that is then thereafter, after actually this very much activate this procedure, this process has very much activated different group people inside. So then thereafter they become active and activated actually. So I wanted to explain these things with some examples how we do actually, because it will be for your understanding only. So please go to next slide. So for example, beekeeping. So this is example. So for is a group, when we implement a beekeeping project, so one CBO, community-based organization, or sometimes NGO, but in this case, mostly big community-based organization is granted. So in the second picture, in the left, you see that the woman in orange, she's the grantee, and she's head of beekeeping community, and she's also a very experienced beekeeper. So this her organization has taken a grant and implemented. So there's in the right part, there are, you see many persons who wear this clothes, they are from different communities. They don't represent one community. They represent. For example, here we maybe about 25 people. So they represent 25 groups, or some community groups are registered, but some are not registered. That's why they represent. Then I will show later. Then there is another. Then these people come here and they are trained, and they are given 2 or 3, sometimes 5 bee colonies. Then go back, with some bee colonies, and they become, they go to their place and they start doing, beekeeping. Then these are same, this is vermicomposting. Then these people are different. They represent, these participants represent different communities. One people from one community mostly. Then they are trained here. Then they take some earthworm, maybe 10,000 or earthworm back to home. Then they deal with. Then they become, involved in these activities. The same thing, this is another example. This is bricketing, animal tongue bricketing. So people from different communities, they come together. Then one NGO, the local NGO, is granted. Then they implement. Then they distribute these hand devices to everyone. Then they go back. Then they if they have something to ask or their problem, then they get back connected to the grantee, and they work at their own places. Then next one, please. Just another one. So these are these herders, herders. They are not collectively registered, but they work together because of grantee organizing this. Then they capacity building here. Then they work on vegetable growing, and this is the last picture is community community tourism. So then please next. I think it's over. Yeah, this is end of my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gambatar, and thank you, Beatrice and Nikki as well, for giving us some insights into the practical implementations on the ground, but also some of the unique challenges that you note in your respective countries. I want to thank you all for your time. I want to thank Risa for inviting me, and I want to thank Terence, Beatrice, Gambatar, and Nikki for sharing the global overview, but also a lot on the country level implementation. I have certainly learned a lot today, and I'm so glad I've been part of it. I want to thank you all, and see you next month in another LIA webinar, which I don't know if it's scheduled already yet, but Risa, please do jump in if so.
Yeah, it's likely going to be 25th March around rule of law and legal identity.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Thank you so much. Have a good day wherever you are.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.